I was mesmerized by the book. Several things sort of struck me, little things actually. Of course, the whole message is overwhelming, and we feel in the presentations today how much that is true and how much it can be impactful. I suggest that if you have the second printing, that we do a second seminar with a few more speakers, because it's so exciting to be together. What there was a few words I really liked. One was the idea of pruning of the brain. Like a gardening, pruning trees. And I felt, you know, that if we were able to prune a bit ourselves, if we would have tools, pruning tools somehow, that you could cut out nocive, you know, ideas which keep coming back and which have no relevance anymore. That would be like a delete system in our brain. I think that would be such a gift. We should learn somehow how to do this pruning, I think.
Space can do that for you, Lee. This is the thing. We can design spaces to allow that to happen so that we can actually be embodied in our spaces properly.
But as Susan taught me, and I think she wants it, is actually the brain can only make so many connections. So the best thing to get rid of the old ones and prune is to continually to have these new salient experiences and put yourself in these new experiences. And by default, you will be pruning. But Susan, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, no, there's a term in neuroscience called erasure, which I think is a really cool term. You can almost envision like erasing parts of your brain, right? In the book, we tell the story, and I'll tell everybody this, but don't tell my husband I told you. So we tell this story about how my husband explained, he's a neuroscientist, he explained neuroplasticity and pruning to me this way. Our very first kiss created this very huge and deep synaptic experience where it created this carve into his neural pathways. And by the process of creating such a strong tactile touch experience, I'm a good kisser, right? All the other kisses that he ever had with anybody else started to fade away and prune away. And so I'll take credit for that. But I think the idea is that the more salient the experiences are, the less these other experiences matter to you. And because the brain is building all of these complexities and neural pathways, by default, literally by default, those are the things that become most important to us. And those are the memories that we really keep. I do think it's interesting that things like smell and smell and taste can bring back memories long forgotten. And it's because of the way that they are stored within the brain that allows that to sort of happen. But it really takes very, very potent memories to do that.
Yeah. Another thing, at one point, you called the brain the Pathfinder. And that brought me back to safari, where when you are driving with a Pathfinder, they use not only their science of, you know, finding the steps and measuring the steps and so on. They also use an enormous amount of intuition, which is mostly on sound. So they will listen to the birds, or the absence of the birds. So the absence of sound becomes the sign. Or they will listen to the monkeys, because the monkeys will get very excited. And then they will just turn the car, and then in the tree is the leopard. I mean, it's an amazing thing to witness, is that they use all the senses, everything God has given us, and they use it all at the same time. And this has this incredible sort of precision of finding. And I think maybe this is also what your book is all about, how since we are training the brain with beauty and with experience and so on, the brain will become more apt possibly to go straight to the subject matter and to be much more performant. Even this afternoon, I feel almost like my brain is exploding because alone, you know, the music is so emotional that it sort of carries you away. So it's so interesting.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, what Susan and I, you know, we didn't write this book to be known. We didn't write it for the money. We wrote it really to get the word out to the masses and almost create a movement where people, we kind of need to go a little back to move forward, right? You and I have talked about this. It's like, and that's why we started looking back into ancient culture, because they understood how critical the music, the painting, the storytelling was to the very fabric of our being. And so I think we need to go back to that place together a little bit, to reconnect to what is important and to express ourselves without judgment. You know, I think a lot of, Susan and I were trying to figure out where did this go wrong, or, you know, the word art came up and then there became judgment on good art and bad art. And I think that shut off a lot of people from just purely expressing themselves. And so that turns into a lot of trauma being repressed. I mean, it's a whole chain of events that really is within our control as a community if we can start to celebrate the arts more.
I talk a little bit about this idea that when you think about arts and aesthetics, I always think about this elephant in the room. It's big, it's ancient, it's old, but depending upon where you touch it, you get something very different. And it's this biology that I think is so interesting. So if you're touching it and you have a neurodegenerative issue like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, there are arts that can help you. If you're grieving, or if you're lonely, or if there are different emotional things that you're addressing, there are specific art forms that you can use. If you're flourishing, same thing. One of the questions was, how do businesses and others use this work? And I think you have to really start from where you are. But we also have learned a couple of things. One is that arts are highly personal and cultural. And so this idea of individualized medicine or personalized medicine, there are personalized arts. And you mentioned this idea that, you know, we feel alive, we feel full, we feel nourished, we feel sustained. And those are the things that we need to build capacity and resiliency. And if we're shut down because we're not using these things that we're wired for, we can't bring our fullest selves into the world or heal or grow. And so that's where I think it's the marriage of all these fields that make this super important.
I had one experience in my life. In 1982, I went to the Documenta the first time, and there was the artwork of Robert Barry. He left us 5 days ago, I learned.
So sad.
Oh, wow.
And this was a big square with, I think it was pink, and it was just layer after layer of color and words. And his voice was narrating the words in that space. And I disappeared in his painting. I was catched and I was disappearing in the plane of the painting. And after a few seconds, I came back, like with a shock. And that was such a strong experience, it was like transcending, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was transcending into art. And I think that has changed my life forever. It made me spiritual in a very sort of natural way. So I do believe that we can have emotional links which are so powerful. Maybe we open, Philip, are you going to bring us through the Q&A?
Lee, can I just say one quick thing in response to what you're saying too? When I was 29, I went to an exhibit of Van Gogh's work in San Francisco. I hadn't done art since I was 11 when a teacher told me I was no good at it. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that exhibit, I was crying so hard. I cried all the way back home. Mm-hmm. And I did my first drawing in basically 20 years and could not turn back, could simply not turn back. And it was and later I read in Van Gogh's letters that he hoped that his art would open the well springs of a person's heart. The man could have no idea that long after his death, that a young woman in San Francisco, that was going to happen to her. And it's transformative. I had no idea before that I was a visual artist at all.
Yeah.
And it changed everything about me. Everything.
That's so amazing, Judy. And the same thing happens with space. It can help you transcend. There are transcendent spaces. People feel that all the time. And we just don't really design our world that way. We don't train ourselves to think of our place. Our world is a transcendent, a place that has the possibility of transcendence. And I think all of this work that Ivy and Susan are talking about is the way to get there.
Yeah, there's a story in the book about the Salk Institute where the building was going to be done one way, and then he went to Italy and started being in awe of some of the spaces there, and came back and knocked down the model and said, we have to start from scratch, because if we're looking to solve the world's problem, scientists cannot be kept in a basement. And did this magnificent building now it was Louis Kahn, right?
Yes.
Susan? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been there, Susan, too. I mean, that it just brings in nature and the moon, and it is awe-inspiring. Yeah, I just want to say one thing, that I do think it's so important that artists just bring forward what's in their soul without worrying how many people might buy it or like it, because like your story, Judy, someone comes along and resonates with it and it changes their life. And if we could all do that, just touch and change one person's life, this system would work.
Well, welcome to the World Hope Forum. This is where I think we've touched nearly 40,000 people's lives. So hopefully today, another 600 at least. I'm going to open up the questions, and I think just to open them to everybody, anybody can answer. The first one is from Christina Merle, and she's asking about smell, because some people seem to not be able to smell anything. So what happens in the brain when a person isn't able to consciously smell?
Wow. I can start there and maybe open it up to other people's sort of view of that. But, I was saying earlier that we are all so individual, and we're also individual in the way our neurobiology is wired. So some people have greater smell receptors. Some people have better vision. Some people actually have more or less touch, more or less taste. And what our brains amazingly do is compensate for that. And so if you can't smell, your other senses take over, and they actually provide the kind of inputs that you need to make sense of the world, which I think is pretty extraordinary. I have a friend, his name is Christopher Bailey. He's the head of the World Health Organization's arts and health programs, and he has glaucoma, and he's losing his eyesight right now. Every day, his sight is a little less. And what he has found is that initially it was petrifying. Absolutely, he couldn't believe it. The sense of grief and loss was huge. But he was at a church, and people kept telling him, your body's going to change, your sensory systems are going to change. You won't know how, but they will. And all of a sudden, instead of seeing the church, he felt the church. He felt the architecture. He felt the music. He saw colors in his mind, and he embodied the world in a new way. He literally rewired his brain. And that's what we do. I mean, that's why I think brain science is so fascinating, and brain awareness is fascinating, because the more you understand it, the more you can take advantage of it for your own life and for your community.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up this concept of embodied cognition, which is what we work with when we're working in neuroaesthetics, and we're looking at space, and we're looking at artistic experiences and interactions, is really being able to understand that, how you experience the world is a body-mind issue. It has your senses as well as your brain. You're not sort of divorcing one from the other. And that's what allows us to feel presence. That's what allows us to really be fully self-aware and perhaps, evolve into better people.
So a few of the questions are also about technology and the internet. So Nora M. Quiez is asking, what will happen to our senses if we are logged to the internet so many hours every day? And how will AR affect us? And then there's another question that maybe is a follow-up from Norwood Creech, which is saying, it seems that we might be growing less sensitive to 2D visual arts and slower experiences. So would such a shift collectively affect the quality of our brain's engagement? So 2 sort of questions for the group.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I am into technology that amplifies our humanity, does not take us out of it. And I think it's both and, not either or. I mean, look at what technology has done for us today. To be together from all over the world is amazing. That said, I think it is up to us to have the and, right? And find the time to get off of a screen and 20 minutes a day engage in some art making or beholding experience does amazing things for lowering cortisol levels. And so I think technology is there for us to be creative and use it. It's a tool to help us, but it's also up to us to put it down and create the time to have these other 3-dimensional experiences that are neuroaesthetic, using touch and smell and sound and color. I mean, I really think we need to take responsibility for that and see technology as tools in the toolbox.
So Ivy, can I just to follow up on that? So the vessel that everybody saw or created, spend some time with that over this next week, just 5 minutes a day, and see what stories or what images want to come out of that vessel, or if it wants to change and transform. 5 minutes, just 5 minutes each morning.
Ivy and I talk about this idea of sensory literacy and being more aware of how your body changes. In the book, there's a little quiz at the beginning. It's called the aesthetic mindset. And it really looks at a couple of different things, not unlike Judy, what you're talking about. What is your kind of capacity or interest in being curious about the world? What are the, can you engage in the world in playful exploration? How do you bring in your senses? Are you aware that you're even, smelling coffee in the morning or flowers outside or the light coming through? Like, how aware are your senses? And then are you making and beholding? And, we make and behold throughout the day. We're always doing something. You might be making dinner or figuring out kind of how you making your way through a conversation. Those are all creative acts. And how are you beholding? It doesn't have to be in a museum or in an art gallery. It could be taking a walk. And so I think the more you're aware of those things, you start to shift your percentages of when you are on technology and when you are in the world. And I think optimizing that is something that's really important.
Yeah, I would love also to add that I think it's also especially for those that it's a condition that you cannot avoid to be in front of technology because it's part of your work, part of your. Bring art in your space, or bring some, a bundle of leaves and use ancient technology as well, so that when you're stressed because you spend so much time in front of it, you just change the air around you. And believe me, these are ancient tools in shamanic tradition. They use it to clean energy. In Peru, they call it shacapas. But my grandmother was using it to clean the stairs in front of her room in Sicily. And so energy, it's around you as not only the visible one, but the invisible one. And that's what art is about, right? How do you connect to now the extension of yourself that is beyond the technology? And I feel that at times we think technology as we need technology to evolve, whereas I think we should reverse. We should understand that we need to evolve in order to use technology in the right way.
Technology, absolutely. I think, Laura, you're so right.
Yeah, I even think, the conversations around AI and generative art, and I just say, we have to see, we can't even yet imagine, which is why it's so important for us to keep exercising our imagination, because some of these new tools will maybe create a foundation, and we're going to take these things to levels that, as artists, as people, that we can't even imagine what they will be, because this is new. It's like when the internet first came on, like we didn't know what we were going to do. We thought it was just to search for things, but look at what it's enabling now. So the reason I'm not fearful of any of these things is I think it might do some things that we do today, but that will allow us to use our brains in much more creative, imaginative ways. And that's where we have to focus, is exercising those muscles.
But then again, in the book, I was mesmerized by the idea of poetry, because you speak about the power of the word. And then you say that actually poetry is beyond just reading. And that in poetry, there is this extra energy, which is healing in yet another way, and more directly maybe, or more specifically aiming maybe. And that suddenly you think, oh my God, I need to start reading poetry because my brain needs it, So it's also an incentive that you think, oh, I didn't know that from all these things, poetry is the best for my brain. So I'd rather exercise, you see?
Well, it's the poetry. Is so beautiful. Somebody asked a question, what was some of the most amazing findings? And maybe that was one of them for me, is that poetry is really at its essence metaphor and symbology. And so we think in terms of symbols. We're very symbol oriented and very metaphoric, and poetry does that. Poetry also uses parts of the brain that are similar to the parts of the brain that music taps into. So there's something about the rhythm and the movement of poetry that also is really super helpful.
I agree, and I love that you use the word metaphor again, and that's why I call my work meta music, because I would love to remind us as well that words, unfortunately, is what are making us so rational, because they create labels and they become box. In ancient traditions, words, they were expressing phenomena. So a word was not an object expressing. It was actually, and that's why most of those words, like in Sicilian, one word has at least 2 or 3 different words inside, and a whole phrase, it's needed to tell you what that means. So in this sense, like I think poetry, like mantras, they become evocation again of something that is so beyond. And our senses are limited in that sense, but they need to be limited. Otherwise, we would not be able to function in this reality. But we need to remember that limit. It's also possible to unleash it and have all of this other, and as Sushi was saying, an environment. I create chambers of awe, places, these chambers where people can enter, as you said, Ivy, in this state of awe, or you, Lee, in front of that colors or paintings. And that awe, that opening, it's again tapping into really what this life is about. So much rich, more rich than what we said.
It's incredibly disarming, which also, from a neurological standpoint, allows you to be present, in space, in time, all of those things, which is so beautiful. Yeah.
So maybe with the poetry, it's also to create poetry each day, just to take a word and catch it. And see what that word wants to do, and play with it and distill the concepts and feel that in your body. And again, just a simple daily exercise, a word that flies past you and you think, oh, and you begin playing with that a little bit and distill it, because poetry is so distilled, it's essential. You're going to be essential. So it's both to read and to write poetry.
It's so layered too, because there's a part of the brain called the Broca region. And when you have trauma or you're highly stressed, sometimes you can't find words. And by physically making art, working with clay, working with painting, masking, collage,
Oops, sorry. Here.
Symbols. And then you can come back and put words to that image. that you created. So, you think about the complexity of that and how that can actually serve to help you find words when you don't have them.
So, sorry to interrupt, but Ivy, I think you need to jump off soon. So I was just wondering.
I do.
Just
So,
wondering if you had any last words before you leave us while we'll continue the questions.
okay. Well, I would say just looking at the comments when I could, this is such an amazing, I have chills. It's a beautiful group, and I couldn't have imagined a better way to spend this Sunday morning, and a better way to, the book is coming out March 21st. And so the fact that we've had this conversation with this community who really gets it feels so supportive. And I think, yeah, like I said, we're doing this because we want everyone to feel supported by the arts as a tool and an expressive tool, and to get to another place. And that's what gives me hope every day. And you can see why I have such hope, because I have such amazing friends and colleagues. So thank you all. And
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy.
Thank you,
So-
Lee. Thank you, Philip. Judy. Lara.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other-
Wonderful.
Other speakers want to stay on just for a few more minutes. We can ask a few of the other audience questions, if that's okay with you, but I understand if some of you have to leave for other
I'm
engagement.
gonna jump in 5, but maybe we take a couple more questions. There's a lot of questions in the Q&A about education. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. I know Judy is super interested in that. Several of the questions are about, why are the arts being taken out of schools when we're talking about them being so important? And Judy, do you want to talk about that?
I don't know why they're being, I don't know that they've ever fully been in schools. Bye, Sushi. There was a period when in Northern California, we were getting enormous arts grants, and that's when we bring artists in. We pay them well. We developed so many different curriculums. They were simply wonderful. And again, I don't know, there are a lot of reasons. They've budget cuts and immediately the arts go because they're not practical, quote, quote, I think the question is, how do we bring them back into the schools? And how do we make them essential? How do we make them essential in all the classrooms? One of the things I loved doing was having, in Healdsburg, teachers would come out to my studio and I would give workshops on Saturdays, and the schools would pay for the teachers to come and do workshops. And I would introduce to them the idea that they had to, that art isn't just a curriculum, that what they need to do is watch what the students are doing and learn from the students, and then develop new exercises that come out of that. So it's teaching the teachers how to see the way that an artist might see. And it's a wonderful way to work with teachers. And I have a definition of a good teacher. If you're not learning every moment that you're teaching, then you're not really teaching. And I have found that again and again and again. And that it's about learning from the students as much as putting something on them. And that's a whole system that existed that needs to be opened up. When at one point, when Lee was talking about the monkeys and the sounds that led the people, I was thinking how everybody's footstep was making the path, and the path was being made in the present moment of hearing everything around and sensing it. But the path was being made by your footsteps being really present. And today I think we can use technology, we can use everything to pull and create a new path with our footsteps, like not knowing exactly where we're going. And then maybe the tiger will appear.
One thought about learning as a system, education as a system is, in the 70s when Sputnik happened in Russia, the United States knee-jerk reaction was to say we need science, math, engineering, and technology. And while the arts weren't in the schools well to begin with. They were there as an enrichment. They started to be pulled out because they thought, oh, that's a nice to have, not a have to have. And I think what we're seeing now is that the arts are really the way we learn, not a nice to have, but it's the only way we learn because we bring the world in through our senses. And I think with the mental health crises that are happening now, we're seeing arts come back to the schools as a way to help children self-regulate, to look at self-esteem, to look at collaboration and community, creativity. And so they're coming in more not as a way to become an expert musician, but a way to negotiate and navigate and build skills that transfer into other areas of your life. And oh, and by the way, it's how wonderful it is that you may become a great musician, as opposed to the goal being great at it. And if you're not good at it, you're chastised and you don't do it because you're shamed and humiliated. And so this shift of how we're seeing the arts, I think because of the changes that the arts we're seeing on the physical and mental well-being is making a difference. And it depends upon the age too, right? Early learning is really about development. You can look at practice, intervention, protection, prevention, and then resilience across the lifespan. So I think we're going to learn a lot in the next couple of years on how the arts change us and how they have to be in all those places. And school for kids is where they are most of the time.
Susan, with that, I just want to quickly mention the hands. As you were talking, Susan, your hands were moving like wings. And I think what the arts do, whether it's music, whatever it is, it uses our hands in such brilliant ways. And that changes our brain. I mean, I don't think we'd have this brain without this opposable thumb. And we forget, and our hands just become these little typing things. That's fine too. But as you were talking, I was just so struck by the way you were moving your hands. And the arts really ask us to use our hands in so many different ways. And they teach us. They're so intelligent. Lee, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say to Susan that if this becomes a movement indeed, maybe from this book, some work group can see the light, which is actually thinking about education, which is going from your findings, you know, including taking the findings as the foundation of a new way of reaching new generations.
That is
very, very, very important that this happens. I think even more so in the United States as in Europe, but in Europe also definitely. And so there's a common goal here, I think, for new generations just to sort of shake things up.
Yeah, I want also to mention what Ivy said about going one step back at times to go many steps forward. And the word education, actually, we need to go like a step back. It comes from ducere, which means to guide out from inside out, whereas we think that education is this impressing in information. So even just that, if we go back to that source of what really this word is about, as you said, Judy and Susan, it's all about instigating what is within us, and through these hands, this manipulation, what art is about, manipulating shapes, sounds, whatever, colors, and that educare, it's educere, it's bringing out what this single individual gift is, because each one of us, we're one of a kind, we're one of a kind expression of this reality, and we need to share it.
That's great, Laura. Yeah, to a lead forth. It's wonderful. How great. Educare. Very interesting.
Lee, thank you. This is really a gift.
Thank you all.
This is wonderful.
Thank you so much.
I'm so excited.
Let's keep so being creative. Exactly.
This is so much fun.
We should make a club and come together every other time. It's very exciting. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Susan.
It's really a gift.
Thank you, Susan and Ivy.
You know, in the text there was this. Let me see. I loved it so much. Oh yeah, it was. You said somewhere, if your lips curl into a smile, then something happens. And my lips have been curling all the time.
A smile, that's the universal language, right?
I
It's
think
the best.
See you later.
Thank you.
Also, thank our audience. We have maybe never had such an important audience on a short notice, and we're very grateful that you're with us, and keep coming. Please take also friends with you next time so we can grow the audiences. It's free, so you can give them a free gift. And see you very soon in April. And thank you, and good luck with the book. I think that will happen anyhow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.